Imagine two brothers, two paths, two offerings, and one single choice that changed everything. The story of Cain and Abel is more than just a Bible story. It's a mirror reflecting the battles we all face: envy, comparison, and the consequences of our choices. Today, we're diving into this timeless narrative to discover how to deal with envy before it consumes our hearts and destroys our relationships. Cain and Abel were brothers, but their lives took different paths. Cain, the older brother, was a farmer. He worked the land diligently, cultivating the fruits that sprung from the soil. His sweat watered the plants, and his calloused hands were a testament to the effort he dedicated to his work. Abel, on the other hand, was a shepherd. He cared for sheep, guiding them through green pastures and protecting them from the dangers of the night. Both had noble occupations, but they were distinct in their essence. One day they came before God to offer sacrifices. Cain brought the fruit of his labor, grains, vegetables, and what he had harvested from the land. Abel, in turn, offered the firstborn of his flock, the best lambs, the healthiest and most perfect. Both gave what they had, but something crucial differentiated their offerings. The Bible tells us that Abel gave with faith and from the heart. His offering wasn't just a ritual. It was an expression of gratitude, of recognition for God's provision. He chose the best he had, not out of obligation, but out of love and devotion. Cain, however, acted differently. He also brought an offering, but his heart wasn't in it. His offering was mechanical, done out of obligation, without the same sincerity that moved Abel. And that's where the seed of envy began to sprout. When God accepted Abel's offering and rejected Cain's, something inside the older brother broke. He didn't understand why his effort wasn't recognized. Instead of reflecting on his own motivations, he allowed comparison and frustration to take over his heart. Envy is a treacherous feeling. It starts small, almost imperceptible, but if it's not confronted, it grows like a weed, suffocating everything around it. Cain didn't know how to deal with this feeling. He looked at Abel and saw not a brother, but a rival. He saw not a blessing, but an injustice. And instead of seeking to understand what was wrong with his own attitude, he allowed anger and resentment to build up. This story teaches us a powerful lesson. It's not just what we do that matters, but how we do it and why we do it. Abel's offering was accepted not because it was better in itself, but because it reflected a sincere heart full of faith. Cain's offering, although the fruit of his labor, lacked the most important essence, a genuine connection with God. What about you? Have you ever stopped to think about the motivations behind your actions? Do you act out of love and gratitude or out of obligation and fear? The story of Cain and Abel invites us to look inside and ask, what are we cultivating in our hearts? Envy, anger, and comparison, or faith, gratitude, and love? The seed of envy sprouted in Cain's heart because he didn't know how to deal with his emotions. But we have the chance to do things differently. We can choose to recognize our feelings, confront them with honesty, and seek healing. We can learn to celebrate the victories of others instead of allowing comparison to consume us. The choice is ours. And unlike Cain, we can choose a better path. Envy is like a silent poison. It doesn't announce its presence with a bang or drama. On the contrary, it insinuates itself discreetly, almost imperceptibly, like a shadow creeping through the corners of the mind. In the beginning, it may seem harmless. A little discomfort here, a twinge of unease there. But if it's not addressed, it grows. And when it grows, it takes over everything, distorting reality, fueling bitterness, and corroding relationships. Cain experienced this in a devastating way. When he saw that Abel's offering was accepted by God and his wasn't, something inside him broke. He didn't understand why. After all, he had also worked hard. He had also given what he had. But instead of seeking to understand what was wrong with his own attitude, he allowed envy to dominate his heart. And once envy takes hold, it doesn't come alone. It brings with it a series of destructive feelings: anger, frustration, resentment, and ultimately, hatred. Cain began to compare his life to Abel's. He looked at his brother and saw not a companion but a rival. He saw not a blessing but an injustice. Why Abel? Why not me? These questions echoed in his mind, fueling the feeling that he had been wronged. And instead of dealing with these feelings in a healthy way, he repressed them, letting them fester in his heart. Comparison is fertile ground for envy. When we compare ourselves to others, we focus on what we don't have instead of valuing what we have already achieved. Cain did exactly that. He didn't see his own blessings, he only saw what Abel had, and he didn't. And in that process, he lost sight of what really mattered: his relationship with God and with his brother. Instead of seeking a solution, Cain allowed envy to lead him to a dark place. He didn't talk to God about his feelings. He didn't ask for help to understand what was happening. He simply let anger and resentment take over him. And when envy reaches that point, it becomes dangerous. It blinds, distorts, and destroys. Cain reached such a dark place that when God confronted him, he couldn't see a way out. Instead of repenting, he chose the path of violence. This story serves as a warning. Envy may seem small at first, but if it's not addressed, it can lead to devastating consequences. It not only affects our relationship with others, but also our relationship with God and ourselves. Cain could have chosen a different path. He could have recognized his feelings, talked to God about them, and sought help to deal with his anger and frustration. But he didn't, and the result was tragic. What about you? How have you been dealing with envy? Have you ever stopped to reflect on the feelings that have been arising in your heart? Envy doesn't have to have the last word. We can choose to confront it, seek healing, and restore what has been damaged. The story of Cain shows us what can happen when we allow envy to control us, but it also gives us the opportunity to learn from his mistakes and choose a better path. The choice is ours. And then it happened. Driven by envy, Cain committed the unthinkable. He took the life of his own brother. Abel, who had been his companion since childhood, who shared with him the same parents, the same stories, the same roof, was killed by the hands of the one who should have protected him. The first fratricide in human history was not just an act of violence. It was the culmination of a series of wrong choices, of unresolved feelings, and of a heart that allowed itself to be dominated by darkness. But the question remains, could this have been avoided? Could Cain have dealt differently with that feeling that consumed him? The answer is yes. Everything could have been different if Cain had chosen another path. Envy, as strong as it may be, doesn't have to lead to destruction. It can be confronted, understood, and overcome. But for that, courage and humility are needed. Cain had the opportunity to change the course of his story. When God saw that he was dominated by anger and envy, he confronted him. Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. Genesis 4:6-7. God was warning Cain about the danger he was in. He was offering a way out, a chance to recognize his feelings and deal with them in a healthy way. But Cain ignored the warning. Instead of mastering sin, he allowed sin to master him. He didn't want to face the envy that was growing inside him. He didn't want to admit that he was wrong. He didn't want to seek help or change his attitude. And so, envy turned into anger, anger into hatred, and hatred into violence. The result was tragic. Abel died, and Cain became a fugitive, carrying the weight of his crime for the rest of his life. But what could Cain have done differently? First, he could have recognized his feelings. Instead of denying envy and anger, he could have admitted that he was feeling wronged and frustrated. Second, he could have talked to God about it. Instead of turning away, he could have drawn closer, seeking guidance and comfort. Third, he could have sought help. Maybe he could have talked to his parents, Adam and Eve, or sought advice on how to deal with those intense feelings. Cain's story teaches us that feelings, no matter how difficult they may be, don't have to control us. We can choose how to react to them. We can choose the path of healing, forgiveness, and restoration. But for that, we need to be honest with ourselves. We need to seek help, and we need to trust that there is always a way out, even when everything seems lost. What about you? How have you been dealing with the feelings that arise in your heart? Have you ever stopped to reflect on what you have been feeding inside you? The story of Cain and Abel shows us the devastating consequences of envy, but it also gives us the opportunity to learn from the mistakes of the past. We can choose a different path. We can choose life. The decision is ours. How many times do we, like Cain, compare ourselves to others? How many times do we look at someone else's life and feel that twinge of discomfort, that feeling that we're falling behind? How many times do we allow envy to lead us to act in ways we never imagined? The truth is that envy is a universal feeling. All of us, at some point in our lives, have experienced that mixture of admiration and frustration when seeing the success, beauty, or achievements of another person. But what we do with that feeling is what defines the course of our story. Cain shows us what happens when envy is nurtured. He looked at Abel and saw not a brother, but a rival. He compared his offering to Abel's, and instead of celebrating his brother's success, allowed comparison to consume him. He felt wronged, belittled, and little by little, envy took over his heart. And when envy takes hold, it doesn't come alone. It brings with it anger, resentment, and ultimately destruction. But envy, as painful as it may be, is not just a negative feeling. It's a signal that something within us needs to be healed. When we feel envy, it's because we're looking outward instead of looking inward. We're focusing on what we don't have instead of valuing what we have already achieved. We're seeking external validation instead of finding security in who we are. Envy shows us where we are insecure. Maybe it's in our career, our relationships, our appearance, or even our spirituality. It points to the areas of our lives that need attention, care, and growth. When we feel envious of someone, it's because that person has touched a wound that hasn't yet been healed. And instead of ignoring that wound, we can use it as an invitation to look inward and seek the healing we need. But how do we do that? How do we transform envy into an opportunity for growth? First, we need to recognize what we're feeling. Instead of denying envy, we can admit that it's there. Second, we need to reflect on why we're feeling that way. What exactly is bothering us? What does that person have that has sparked this reaction in us? Third, we need to act. We can seek to improve in that area that has made us insecure, or we can simply learn to celebrate the achievements of others, understanding that their success doesn't diminish ours. Cain's story teaches us that envy doesn't have to have the last word. We can choose to deal with it in a healthy way. We can use it as a mirror, reflecting our insecurities and inviting us to grow. And by doing so, we not only free ourselves from bitterness, but we also become more complete, more secure, and more capable of loving. What about you? Have you ever stopped to reflect on the times when you have compared yourself to others? Have you noticed how envy can be a window to self-knowledge? The truth is that we all have areas that need to be healed, wounds that need to be treated. And envy, as uncomfortable as it may be, can be the first step on that journey of healing. The choice is ours. We can let envy control us, as Cain did, or we can use it as a tool to become the best version of ourselves. But there is a way out. Despite envy being a powerful and often overwhelming feeling, it doesn't have to dominate us. We can choose to deal with it in a healthy way. We can transform this negative emotion into an opportunity for growth, for self-knowledge, and above all, for healing. The story of Cain and Abel is not just a warning about the dangers of envy. It also points us to a path of hope, a path that begins with the recognition of our feelings and ends with the restoration of our heart. The first step is recognizing what we're feeling. Often, we try to hide envy even from ourselves. We think it's shameful to admit that we feel something so small or petty. But the truth is that envy is a human emotion, and denying it only makes it grow in silence. When we recognize that we're envious, we take away the power it has over us. We can look at it head on and say, yes, I'm envious. And now, what do I do with it? The second step is talking to God about these feelings. Cain had the chance to do that. God confronted him directly, asking why he was angry and why his face was downcast. He even gave Cain a solution. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Genesis 4:7. But Cain chose to ignore the divine advice. We, however, can learn from this mistake. We can take our feelings to God in prayer, without fear of being judged. We can say, Lord, I'm envious. I'm feeling wronged. Help me understand what is happening inside me. God doesn't reject us because of our feelings. He wants to help us deal with them. The third step is to seek help if needed. Sometimes envy is linked to deep wounds, past traumas, or insecurities that we can't overcome on our own. And it's okay to ask for help. We can talk to someone we trust, like a friend, a mentor, or even a professional, such as a psychologist or counselor. Sharing what we're feeling can bring relief and help us see new perspectives. The story of Cain and Abel teaches us that envy doesn't have to have the last word. We can choose a different path. We can choose the path of healing, where we face our wounds and allow God to restore us. We can choose the path of forgiveness, where we release those who have hurt us and also forgive ourselves for giving in to envy. And finally, we can choose the path of restoration, where we rebuild our relationships and our connection with God. Imagine how Cain's story could have been different if he had chosen this path. He could have recognized his envy, talked to God about it, and sought help to deal with his feelings. He could have reconciled with Abel and found peace. But unfortunately, he chose the path of destruction. And you, which path will you choose? Envy may seem strong, but it's not stronger than the power of God in our lives. We can choose healing. We can choose forgiveness. We can choose restoration. The decision is ours. And unlike Cain, we can write a story of victory, not defeat. So what will your choice be? The story of Cain and Abel isn't just an ancient account. It's a mirror that reflects the battles we all face daily. Envy, comparison, resentment and anger are feelings that, to a greater or lesser extent, have passed through the heart of each of us. The question isn't whether we will feel envy, but how we will deal with it when it arises. Will we allow it to control our lives, leading us to make decisions we will later regret? Or will we face it head-on, seeking healing, peace, and restoration? Cain shows us what happens when we let envy take control. He allowed a momentary feeling to turn into an irreversible action. He didn't seek help, didn't reflect on his emotions, and didn't heed God's warning. The result was tragic. He lost his brother, distanced himself from God, and carried the weight of his mistake for the rest of his life. But Cain's story doesn't have to be ours. We can learn from his mistakes and make different choices. Envy, when not confronted, can lead us to dark places. It can destroy relationships, undermine our self-esteem, and distance us from God. But when faced with courage and humility, it can become a powerful tool for self-knowledge and growth. Envy shows us where we are insecure, where we need to grow, and where we need healing. It invites us to look inward and confront the wounds that haven't yet been treated. So how can we face envy head-on? First, we need to recognize that it exists. Instead of ignoring or denying what we're feeling, we can admit, I'm feeling envious, I'm comparing myself, I'm feeling wronged. This is the first step toward healing. Second, We need to talk to God about these feelings. He knows our hearts better than anyone and is willing to help us deal with what we're going through. Third, we need to seek help if needed. Sometimes envy is linked to deeper issues, such as past traumas or ingrained insecurities, and it may be necessary to seek professional support or from trusted individuals. The story of Cain and Abel isn't just a warning, it's an invitation to reflect on our own internal battles, an invitation to look inward and ask, what is fueling the envy in my heart? What do I need to face to find peace? And finally, it's an invitation to choose a better path, a path of healing, of forgiveness, and of restoration. The decision is yours. You can choose to let envy control your life as Cain did, or you can choose to face it head-on, seeking the help of God and those who can support you on this journey. You can choose the path of destruction or the path of life. The story of Cain and Abel shows us the consequences of a wrong choice, but it also gives us hope that we can do differently. So, what will your choice be? Will you allow envy to define your future, or will you seek the healing and peace that only God can offer? The decision is yours, and it can change everything. Choose wisely. Choose life.